This is ISE 460 at the University of Southern California. Today we'll be presenting measures of worth using SWOT analysis. SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We'll be starting off with Gary presenting present worth. Tiffany will then proceed with annual worth. Jonathan will do internal rate of return, or IRR, and then I will do cost-benefit analysis. I'm Francesca, by the way. Here's our presentation.
So present worth method is a calculation that reduces all cash flows to a single equivalent cash flow or dollar value. Let's say you just received a $50,000 as a bonus and you want to buy a new car. You go to the BMW dealership and then you just find two cars. One's a hybrid and one's a gasoline. The MSRP price for the hybrid car is $50,000, and for the gasoline it's $35,000. And let's say that you're going to use this car for 10 years, and the salvage value for the hybrid car is $15,000 and $10,000 for the gasoline car. For the annual cost to maintain these cars will be $2,500 for the gasoline and $1,200 for the hybrid. So if you plug these values into the present worth method formula, we get $50,000 for the hybrid and $48,000 for the gasoline. If you're not an eco-friendly person and more like a businessman, you definitely go for the gasoline car since it's cheaper to maintain. There are many strengths with this method. Let's say NPV method gives an absolute value in dollars compared to the IRR, which gives in percentage. NPV also allows for the time value for the cash flows. And most of all, it will give the correct decision advised assuming a perfect capital market. It will also give correct ranking for mutually exclusive projects. Let's say you have $1,000 to invest in two options. First option, you invest $1,000 and you receive $220 annually for 6 years. The NPV, let's say the discount rate is at 5% as well too. The NPV value will be at $117 and IRR rate will be at 0.086. The second option is investing $1,000 and receiving $0 annually, but receiving $1,550 on the 6th year. The NPV value is at 157, but the IRR rate is at 0.076. So the IRR value was misleading. Despite the strength of this method, there's certainly some weaknesses. The NPV computations are really just a summation of multiple discounted cash flows, both positive and negative, converted into present value terms for the same point in time. As such, the discount rate used in the denominators of each present value computation is critical in determining what the final NPV number will turn out to be. A small increase or decrease in the discount rate will have a considerable effect on the final output. So if NPV calculation uses different discount rates, then it produces different results for the same project. But IRR rates always give the same result. NPV is not that flexible and only uses information available at the time of the decision. It does not account for changes to the projects after the initial decision is made. NPV factors in risk by using a single discount rate, but in reality, choices in the future concerning the project will likely change its payoff and its risks. Most of all, NPV only evaluates tangible and quantifiable projects. Some projects with negative NPVs are carried out anyways because they have some kind of strategic value. And now, Tiffany is going to introduce about the annual worth method.
Okay, so once you know what present worth is, you can easily transform that value into annual worth. So one of the strengths of annual worth is that you can take a complicated set of cash flows, which includes costs, revenues, interests, and they all occur periodically, whether they be per month, per year, or per quarter. And all of that information can be simplified into one value. And this way you can refer to the cash flow as if it's a uniform series. So the basic steps can be looked at like this. First, you just move all of the benefits and the costs to the present time period of 0, and that can be compared to just scooping a bunch of peanut butter into a spoon. So it's just all in one clump. And then you can spread that amount evenly over the lifespan, which is like spreading the peanut butter evenly over a piece of toast. And that gives you the annual worth. But one weakness of this, can you go back to the but one weakness of this method is that in this case you're assuming an average amount for each year, and of course that's not really realistic. It's greatly simplifying the situation. So really your taxable income would be varying. So you have to consider the amount that your income varies from this average amount that's assumed. And annual worth can also be compared to a unit cost. So although ultimately when you use this method you get the same decision result as you would if you did present worth, the rationale is often easier to grasp if you look at it this way. And here's an example of how you might determine the value of oatmeal when you go grocery shopping. At first glance, just looking at the packaging and how much is contained in each package and how much it costs, it can be complicated to determine which is the better deal. But if you calculate it out like this and determine the cost per serving, it gives you an easy amount to look at, and you can easily see that the old-fashioned oats on the right are they actually give you more for your money. When doing these calculations, the annual worth is actually made up of capital return, and from that you subtract the annual amount. Capital return contains the initial investment, which is P, and the salvage value S, which is what you get back at the end. And the annual amount contains all of the annual operating costs. So one method is you can take the annual worth of the present and then calculate the annual worth of the salvage and then add those together. Or you can do the original cost and add that to the present worth of the salvage value and then take the annual worth of that entire value to find the variance.
Yeah, I think it's there's a transition on it.
Okay, so here's an example. Let's say you have two apartments that are for rent. Location A at the top has a 6-month lease, costs $15,000 initially, and also $3,500 per month, which might be like maintenance or other rental fees. And at the end of the 6-month lease, you get your return deposit back of $1,000. And then location B has a 9-month lease, costs $18,000 initially. The monthly fees are $3,100, and your deposit that you get back is $2,000. So one weakness that we can look at for annual worth is that when comparing two or more alternatives, you must use the least common multiple rule. So after the first life cycle, you have to assume that the first cost is repeated at the end of in year 0 of the new cycle, which is the last year of the previous one. And you have to assume that the first cycle of cash flows is repeated for all successive cycles and that they're exactly the same each time. And if this isn't true, then your results might be a little off. But in this case, let's say you needed to live at a location for 18 months. So you can repeat the 6-month lease 3 times or the 9-month lease twice. But again, in this case, you'd be assuming that all of the values were exactly the same, so there's no variation in, let's say, like monthly homeowners association fees or maintenance or any problems that might come up. But the big value, again, of using annual worth is that to compare the different lifetimes, you only need to calculate, or you can just look at annual worth, just one simple value. So even though these all have different lifetimes, different monthly costs, different initial costs, if you look at the calculations done here, the present worth is calculated for each and then simplify it into the annual worth, and it's easy to see that location B would be the best choice because it ends up costing less. So in conclusion, for annual worth, it's just an easy way to compare alternatives. And now Jonathan will go on to concentrate on IRR.
Okay. Well, no more surprises. But, so I'm going to cover IRR, the internal rate of return. And so the idea about IRR, or at least the intuitive idea about IRR, it's the rate of return on your investment. And in order to give a better idea as to what that means, I was reminded of a story while I was preparing for this presentation. It happened about a few months ago. So what happened was, my dad picked me up and he said, open up a bank account with Chase. And I was like, okay, wow, why'd you do that? He said, well, they're going to give me 10% on my return, on my investment. I was like, well, that's great. Banks don't usually give that. So then I asked for more details, and he tells me, well, I guess right now they're having this promotional thing where you invest $1,500, and at the end of 6 months, they'll give you $150. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So after reading chapters 4 and 5 on IRR, I started thinking about it. And I was like, the IRR has a certain attractiveness to it. And what I found what was attractive about it, it was all he told me about the investment was that he's going to get 10% on his return. And that, to me, I thought was, that's an attractive, that's appealing about it. Because if you were to present a potential investment on a project, and to people who don't know necessarily the details of the project, you might just want to tell them how much profit you'll get out the project, or how much it's worth. So then I started thinking even further. I'm like, okay, well, usually IR proposals, they generally need some sort of MARR. And I was wondering, well, what was his MARR? Well, what could he have done with that $1,500 instead? He could have stuck it into Wells Fargo. And what would happen there? Well, at the end of 6 months, Wells Fargo would have given him a nice 8 cents at the end of 6 months. Why? Because his MARR is 0.0053%. Well, because they have 1.01% annually, compounded daily, for at the end of 182 days, this would be the MARR. So really, that's what he is. That's what he has to compare off of. And I thought that was interesting because it really illustrates the strength of IRR. He didn't have to tell me what was the present worth of the proposal. He didn't have to tell me what was the future value of it. Initially, all he told me is going to get 10% on investment. And that, I felt, was a very attractive aspect of the IRR method. But the IRR method does have its downfalls. And to illustrate this, let's come up with a hypothetical situation. Imagine, you're 8 years old, it's your birthday, and you get $400. So you get $400, you're excited, and your compulsive gambling grandma comes up to you and she says, you know what, time to rough at the casinos. I'm going to need that $400. But she says, if you give it to me, I'll give you $100 on every one of your birthdays for your next 5 birthdays. And so you're thinking, wow, and for whatever reason you're 8 years old and you know how to calculate the IRR of that. And what you come up with is like, I'm going to get 8% on this return. And you're excited. So you go to bed that night thinking, man, my 13th birthday, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have $587.73 in my account. So what happens? 13th birthday comes along, check the account, because of course you had to open up a savings account for you to invest it in. And what do you find in your account? What do you guys find in the account? Well, what you find in the account is you're going to say $500.10. Why? Because she's going to take that money and invest it into the Wells Fargo savings account, and you're going to earn an awesome 0.01% on that. So what happened here? What happened to the 587? What happened was that the IRR inherently implies that all the cash flow you're going to get and reinvest it at the same rate of return. You're going to get, so for every cash flow, you're going to get it and reinvest it into a project proposal that also generates the same IRR. And if you don't, what happened was each of the $100 cash flows didn't have an opportunity to gain 8% to be reinvested. So what happened? Each one gained 0.01%. And so this, as innocent as this may be, you might think of a situation where, you have to understand what your MARR is. Say it was like $1 million project, and you didn't necessarily have a place that gave the same MARR as to what it is that the project would generate. So all the cash flows that you get, you can't reinvest it into the project, so you're not going to get, so at the end of the time period, you're not going to get the predicted value that you think you'd get, because IRR inherently assumes that you're going to get back, or that you're going to invest all cash flows at the IRR calculated. And so there's this weakness and there's other multiple weaknesses, but this is the point that was most common in literature, and I thought that it was relevant to say. So, if you have a commercial banking and you're putting your money in the same account, you know what your MARR is. So then you can potentially understand what IRRs are relevant, and also know where those cash flows are going and what is the interest that you're going to get on your return. And now we're going to have Francesca talk about benefit costs.
Okay, so the benefit cost ratio is used anytime you would want to weigh options. It's frequently used outside of finance, actually, particularly when governments are weighing public policy options. because it's great actually at dealing with non-monetary values as well. The benefit cost ratio deals with benefits, costs, and disbenefits, which sounds kind of weird because it seems like it would be the same as a cost. Really, disbenefits are a lot like costs. Costs are like an initial cost, and then the disbenefit is something that can go either in the numerator or denominator of your benefit cost ratio because it's something that's ongoing. It also uses the acceptance criterion, which means that the ratio should be greater than 1 if the investment is being considered attractive. So here I've got an example that applies to my everyday life and hopefully to yours as well. It's weighing the options of buying individual lift tickets or a season pass when you go skiing. So we're weighing both these options against our do-nothing alternative, which is staying at your old resort and buying lift tickets there. So this is a different resort where you can get individual lift tickets or season passes. I've assumed that you're going to go skiing 9 times in a 3-month period, which if you don't live very near the mountains is realistic. And so we can see our benefits, costs, and maintenance expenses or disbenefits. And great, both options come out to a ratio of greater than 1, which means they are attractive, or at least more attractive than your old alternative. When we do our incremental analysis, we can see that actually the season pass is the better value because this ratio also comes out to greater than 1. However, though it was great at weighing those two options, the benefit cost analysis is not very good at weighing options when the benefits are the exact same. See here, we've changed the Y options benefits to match X, and okay, they come out to greater than 1. Things are still going smoothly, but when you try and do incremental analysis, if you put the disbenefits in the denominator, you're going to get 0, so your ratio comes out to 0, which is not useful. And if you put the disbenefits in the numerator, then you get a negative ratio, which is not useful, again. So while it's good at weighing options when the benefits are different, weighing options when the benefits are the same is a bad idea, and you should look to other options that we've mentioned. All right, we're going to have Jonathan now concluding on our analysis.
So in summary of everything that we've gone over today, what the idea of today's proposal, or today's presentation was to give an investor tools in order to make better decisions on their investments. So the SWOT analysis is really the strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats on your particular investment. Now, we went over the strengths and weaknesses, but to conclude, what are the opportunities? Well, the opportunities that have been gained are now that you have options as an investor to adequately assess what the potential investments might entail. But with that, you also increase the probability of potentially making a mistake or misuse of a tool. So with an increase in options, you also have an increase in potential errors of mismanagement of these tools. But this concludes our presentation on the SWOT analysis, and thank you very much. Any questions?